Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champion Psychology, a show with a goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming. I'm one of your hosts, Treavor Bettis, here to voice your questions from the chat to people who actually know what they're talking about. With me this week is
That's
Raffael.
an assumption, sir.
Hey, I'm here.
Don't you put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby.
With me this week is Raffael Boccamazzo, aka Dr. B, and special guest Kelli Dunlap. But there may be people out there in chat who do not know who you are, so who are you both for the fine folks who may not know?
You always complain about me going first, so I'm trying to give you the option.
I don't complain about you going first. I like it when you've got so many awesome credentials and you're so amazing. And
that's why you're like, yeah, no, I have to follow that. I'm just trying to
this is like
navigate
doing the podcast
a new
with my siblings.
Fine. I'll go first.
Okay. Okay, fine.
Kind of like guests go first.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. B for long Italian name reasons. I'm Raffael Boccamazzo, better known as Dr. B. I'm a clinical psychologist in Washington State and the clinical director of what was the first mental health nonprofit to serve the game community, TakeThis.org. And if you're not following us, you absolutely should be. And I'm also an expert on applied role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and clinical learning settings. I talk about burnout. I do all sorts of stuff, and I'm a consultant on how to ADHD. Dr. Dunlap.
Oh, are you done? Are you done? I just want to make sure you're done. Hello. Hello, my name is Dr. Kelli Dunlap. I also work at Take This. Dr. B is my boss, technically, which is why I enjoy
so much respect.
This banter. It's how we do. So I am the head of community at Take This. So I'm in charge of our Discord, our streaming, a lot of our clinical content, our graphic design. I do a lot of things. So many things. But on top of that, I am a clinical psychologist and I have my own practice. So I do therapy and also do research because I also have a master's in game design. And so I occasionally teach games at the American University's Game Center. So I teach grad students coursework around things like the psychology, cultural, and social impact of games and game design. And I'm forgetting something, I'm sure.
So many. How many keynotes are you doing this year?
I don't know. The year's not over yet. But shortly after this, I'm so glad the timing worked out because literally about 20 minutes after this ends, I am heading to the airport to fly to Cologne, Germany for the Clash of Realities conference. They have a psychology and games track and I get to be a keynote.
That's a cool name for a conference.
Clash I like to say I'm opening for Tracy Fullerton, and there's like 5 people in the world that care about that, but it is true. And I mean, Tracy Fullerton is it's like I'm opening for the Beatles. So it's really, really cool.
That's
and
awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here and I see some familiar faces in the audience. Chimp195 says best CM certified. So right here.
What's up?
I know. I'm sure there's other stuff, but whatever. We don't have all day.
Well, we are here today to talk about media and psychology ethics.
Oh yeah. Well, okay, so let's talk about why we're talking about this. Okay. Get real meta with it.
Why are we talking about talking?
Well, we're talking about it because there are in fact ethics around how mental health professionals in various bodies of work are supposed to interact with the media. And we're not gonna get into calling people out for the people who we think are doing it terribly, but if privately No, that's in the notes. We're not called.
Oh yes, the notes I read.
Yes,
Yes.
100, yes, the notes you totally, absolutely read with
totally
your
read.
eyes.
We are going to call out people who we think do things pretty well, because we always like to elevate people who are doing things well. But I think privately, no matter what mental health professional you ask, every single one of us has like an advice columnist or some radio therapist, because they're not all therapists.
Nope.
And that's a big misconception. Part of the reason we want to talk about this, that privately we will all grumble about and we will get on a sandbox about. And so like with the American Psychological Association, we're not supposed to give direct advice to people in a media setting, because you're not our clients. And I know that the American Psychiatric Association has similar ethics around it, and various other mental health organizations do as well. And the whole purpose of that is, well, you know what? Let's actually talk to our expert about this, because that's why she's here. Dr. Dunlap, why don't I diagnose people in the chat?
I mean, you could. There's nothing actually stopping you other than the threat
Other
of
than losing my license.
I would say other than the threat of you losing your license and causing irreparable harm to another human being.
Oh, that's all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm glad we kept this episode low stakes.
Yes.
But I mean, let's talk about that irreparable harm. Why would me, if I happen to see some comment in the chat, and not that I would ever do this, chat, and I'm not doing this, by the way, I am disclaiming the absolute crap out of this. If I saw some random comment in the chat and I was like, boy, that sounds really like you might have depression, what's wrong with me doing that?
Okay.
I'm not doing that, by the way.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, I think one of the most important misconceptions when it comes to talking about like digital ethics, especially ethics in a space like a streaming space, is that you can just say a disclaimer and then that's fine. That you're covered. Legally, maybe, but ethically, no, that doesn't cut it. The idea that if you are billing yourself as a mental health professional, we came onto this podcast, Dr. B, Dr. Kelli, clinical psychologists. We are using our position and our status as experts as part of why people would show up to this. And so you can't claim to be Dr. Kelli Dunlap and then go, nothing I say can be taken as clinical advice, and then continue to dispense clinical advice. Right. That is unethical, because when you are in a therapeutic relationship, like that's what's required is an actual relationship with someone. There is an understanding of, client and provider. There are rules that you have to follow as a client. There are rules that I have to follow as a provider. And this is the only way that therapy works. And so whether it's diagnostics or treating symptoms or things like that, you can't possibly know what someone's going through without talking to them. And so that's kind of like just prescribing a medication when you have no clue, like, oh, I have a headache. Oh, here's some lithium. Does lithium take care of headaches? Yes. Is that the appropriate medication for your headache? Probably not. And I am not dispensing medical advice because I'm not that kind of doctor, but that's the same thing. Like you wouldn't do that with other professions, hopefully. Because it's a safety issue. You don't know what's going on with that person. And so when you're making recommendations that impact a person's body and their mind, you can't just pretend that you know what you're talking about if you're presenting yourself as a professional.
Well, and I know this is part of the reason we have that lovely oboe music at the beginning, but what I'm hearing you say is that there's a difference between legal disclaimers, which we cover multiple times throughout the course of the show, both verbally and textually. Textually, I have letters after my name. I can make things up. Sure. But we in both text and verbally, we have disclaimers all the time. But you're saying there's a difference between saying I'm definitely not doing the thing and actually not doing the thing.
Yes. Yeah. So the idea that I can just show up and say, okay, everybody in chat, I know I introduced myself as a doctor, as licensed as a clinical professional, but now you can't now you don't take the words that I am giving you as that of a professional. You can't have it both ways. Now, if I logged on to like my secret Halo gamer tag account and just talked with people and I'm just, my gamer tag there and nobody knows that I'm the provider, not that I would go around like saying I would never say those things anyway. I would never diagnose, but I'm a little bit freer because I'm not posing myself as an expert and dispensing expertise. And so that's why you can, one thing I tell our ambassadors all the time is that there's some frustration that like, well, I'm not a mental health professional. I can't help people. Or on stream, I'm not their therapist. I don't know what to do. And I always try to remind streamers that work in a mental health space is that your job isn't to treat. The biggest impact you can have is preventative, because you can talk about your personal experience. You can talk about what it was like when you went through depression or when you were recovering for something or something happened to you, because that's your personal story and people understand that that's you and your story. If I were to tell a story about my depression or my anxiety and then what the medication I take in my treatment protocol, someone could interpret that as medical advice because I am framing myself and I am an actual expert. And so you just have to be really careful about, how you present yourself and, what you're presenting yourself as.
And, Trevor and I were actually talking about this yesterday because there's essentially being a mental health professional in a public space, especially if you do any self-disclosure or advocacy work. And this is something that I know you and I talk about with some regularity. It presents some interesting challenges. Like I'm very public about being autistic. I'm very public about being ADHD. And me disclosing some of my story is a part of that work. But one of the things I feel very self-conscious about it sometimes, and Trevor was kind enough to remind me that typically when I do on the show, it's front loaded with, I'm not telling you what to do. This is about me. If you have any questions about you, please go see a licensed professional who can work with your case. I am simply factually relaying my story and 15 other disclaimers because of exactly that. It can be so easily misinterpreted as me endorsing what other people can or should do, even though that's not what I'm doing. And I don't want to do that. That's dangerous.
Yes. And it's so tough because a lot of times if people are asking these questions, it's because they do need help. And the mental health system is not the most easy thing to navigate.
No.
So there's always this tension between wanting to help and wanting to educate and support, because that's why we're in this profession, and the line between like giving information and giving advice. Those are two very different things that sometimes can get really, really murky. And that's why ethics is so important. Not because there's a right there are right and wrong ways, like don't sleep with your client. That's definitely a wrong thing. Don't prescribe medication over Twitch. That's also a wrong thing. But most of the time there's something in media ethics that it's usually ethically gray. And so it gives you kind of a strategy for navigating, okay, this has come up. What is the most ethical way for me to handle this? So it's not about being perfect and having the right answer. It's about always putting the safety of others first and foremost.
Well, that's really what it comes down to, doesn't it? Because what happens? Hey, Trevor, let me ask you this.
What's up?
What happens if I meet you for 5 seconds the first time we met, and I'm like, dude, you've got PTSD. You should see someone about that.
I would be immediately uncomfortable.
But why?
Because,
I'm an expert.
I'll be honest, like if this is like me in this moment right now, I'd be like, no, you are not. If I met some dude and was just like 5 minutes like, I think you have PTSD. I think you need to go check some information out. Yeah, because like again, you've known me for 5 minutes. Like that's if I was in like a if I went to a therapist and 5 minutes in they're like, I think you have PTSD, I'd be like, that was fast. That was real fast.
Didn't even ask me any questions.
Yeah.
You just looked at me.
I barely got through. I like playing Destiny 2.
The thing is, it's the shape of your head that
I was gonna say that.
It's that's why I have this, because it's a guide, and the frontal ridge of your cranial plate gives me the idea that you have a certain degree of criminality. Phrenology is BS, gang.
Yeah. Phrenology is basically being able to divine a person's personality and traits and things like that from the shape and size of their cranium. So that's what phrenology was. So, and
it is there. By the way, if you do a deep dive into it, it has such a racist history. It is naughty. It is ridiculous.
Well, let's be honest. Most psychological assessment is based in genocide and racism. So,
Yay,
but
profession! That's a different show.
Different show. Next time.
Eugenics.
Next time. We picked the happiest topics. We are so fun at parties.
Oh,
you don't even know.
But how much, Trevor, I'm thinking about this. How much damage could I do to your life if you took me seriously after 5 minutes of knowing you?
If I took you seriously, I mean, like let's say this is a few years ago before I knew y'all and knew all this information and everything, I would be sitting there in my own head being like, oh crud, do I do this? Do I need to get checked out for this? And I would just start spiraling after that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of it has to do with power differential, because if a professional is telling you something, if a medical professional, like if my dentist says, you have an extra tooth we need to pull. Okay, who am I? I don't. I'm just saying that I hate the dentist.
I don't care my dentist when he said that.
But, okay. Well, some people would be like, oh, okay. Or, hey, Kelli, we did your blood work and you have low iron. You need to take a supplement. Okay, there's an inherent power differential there because I don't know. And so it's the same thing when we're talking about mental health is if someone is saying, hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so, and I have this lovely degree and license and everything, and I can tell you that you have this disorder and this is the treatment for that disorder, I don't blame anybody for believing them, because what else are you going to do? You're going to go be your own doctor on WebMD? I mean, a lot of people do that. And sometimes it can be really helpful. I know, especially in the ADHD and the autism communities, self-diagnosis is a big thing because a lot of providers just I wasn't trained to diagnose either of those. That wasn't something that we actually received training on. So I'm not saying, self-advocacy is bad, but also if a professional is telling you something, it is not your fault for believing them.
Right. And that's one of the big things that we have to take into consideration. And that's Trevor and Mitra and I have a lot of ongoing conversations, gang, about how to do this in a way that is educational, that we talk about. We do disclose some of our own stories, yes, with a lot of disclaimers beforehand. And we also talk about generalities. I'm going to tell you some of the common phrases I use to really frame things. And some of you regular viewers are going to start picking up on it. Common strategies, because I can describe what is commonly done about a diagnosis without making it about any particular person. And that's just informational. I can talk about common courses of a diagnosis because that's informational. But if you notice, maybe some of you have noticed how many times I've said to questions in the chat, so we can't give you direct advice. We can't give you a direct answer. What we can talk about is some commonalities about that question. And I talk around those questions for a reason, because it could not only hurt you, it can, do damage to other people in the chat who might take that at gospel truth.
I love how one of the ways you can tell somebody is a psychologist or in the mental health field is to see how many different ways they know how to say maybe. Likely, sometimes common strategies include perhaps, propensity for, increased likelihood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
so a typical course for this. However, the two words that we say so often on this show are it depends.
Literally just got put in the chat as you said that.
Yep.
Lurking writer, quote, it depends, Dr. B.
Thank you,
maybe.
Writer.
And honestly, I know sometimes it's frustrating not to get a straight answer, but if you're talking to, scientists in general, but especially social scientists, and someone says something with almost absolute certainty, that's a red flag a lot of the time, because, the idea that if we could know, we'd be out of a job if we could predict and treat every single person 100% effectively 100% of the time. That's not how human beings work. And so even if it works for 99% of people, there's still a possibility that it's not going to work for someone else. So the it depends is right up there with how does that make you feel as the most common phrases, how to tell you're a psychologist or mental health professional without saying you are.
Oh God. Yeah. And we know it's frustrating, by the way, gang. We know you want direct answers, especially when shows like this fill an important niche, I think, within a mental health system in terms of providing information.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's a lot of gaps in terms of direct treatment, and it's tempting when people come on shows like this to give definitive answers or clinical answers or give advice when that's not the role of an informational program. But it's what you have access to in so many cases, because there's just a lot of people are booked up, people are expensive. And it's tempting to just want to ask direct advice questions.
Yeah. And I never mind when people ask direct advice questions. I mean, I don't, because no matter what they ask or how they ask, I'm still going to answer in the same way, in terms of like, okay, so generally speaking, if we're talking about depression, we're talking about X, Y, and Z. These are common symptoms of depression. And for people who experience depression, some strategies that may be useful include X, Y, and Z. So I know I never mind it, because most people just don't like it's, we don't get taught this in school. Like, I know the Pythagorean theorem. I have never used it in my entire life. I took geometry, I took pre-calc, completely, utterly useless and worthless. If you like math, I heart you, but like for me, completely, utterly useless. Like,
I know I used the Pythagorean theorem once in my adult life, and I do not remember what it was for. But I know I did it once.
Hold on. I think I know what it was for.
What?
A triangle.
Oh my God. Oh my God. So yes, the idea, my brain derailed. Yeah. I don't even know. I'm gone. It's gone.
The thing that I think I want to put in here is that, like, I think, like, at least with the goal of this show is like, we're not here to tell you what is wrong with you. We're here to get you to think about stuff. Like when we did the ADHD and autism episode, like we had people that were coming in afterwards. It was like, hey, after your episode, I did a lot of thinking and I went and got diagnosed, and either I did have it or I didn't have it. Like, we didn't tell you you did, but we talked about our experiences with it, which made some people think about it and decided to go get diagnosed themselves.
And that's another part of information can be normalizing an experience, because there's so we talked about that before that episode of us revealing our stories, of us having a platform in just a purely historical, informational way, and just self-disclosing what some of our experiences are. That potentially has the effect of educating people on what other people's experiences are and just normalizing it, making it less stigmatized and so forth. And that's a great use of media, I think. I mean, I'm biased, I was there, but
I'm just thinking of this lovely slide deck I have on my computer that I will be giving in a few short days while I'm in Germany. And one of the stats is that media, so public media, so television, film, video games, is the #1 way that people get information about mental illness. So that's why you say depictions in games and television shows and books and films is so important, because the first time somebody maybe comes in contact with mental illness or learns about it is from these representations and depictions, which is why stigma continues to be so pervasive, because we still continue to have the majority of the representations be so heavily stigmatized and stereotyped. And so that's when we're talking about media ethics, and that's the other side of it. Not just me as a clinician, but what I'm putting out there, I'm trying to be very cognizant of any stigmas or stereotypes that I may unwittingly perpetuate, because again, in a public space like this is where people get their information from. Not everybody sits down with journals and a hot cup of cocoa and, spends their Saturdays highlighting confidence intervals.
Those people make good choices.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, a good highlighter, I don't know. There's something.
Love a good highlighter. Love a good highlighter.
Every time somebody's like, I'm going to grad school, so you've made poor choices in life.
Yes.
Got it.
Or when they ask, I'm thinking about doing a doctorate. No,
don't.
No.
But so coming back to that, like, just because I know you would know the statistic off the top of your head. How many villains are homicidal maniacs?
Of AAA titles, 25% of games depict mental illness in a character, and of that 25%, 69% portray
Nice.
the homicidal maniac trope. Grow up, young man.
Of
Grow
all the
up.
times I ever expected there to be that joke, that was not one of them.
And I thought about it too. I'm like, I could round up to 70. No, I'm going to be honest to the data. And there he did it. I had faith and he let me down. But yeah, so basically more than about 2/3 of all mental illness portrayals in games are the exceedingly violent criminal, psychopath, villain, and maybe not even a villain. Like there's lots of side characters. One of my favorites is Seth Briars from Red Dead Redemption. He's got some necrophilia going on, and he's completely, off his horse, I guess would be the correct term for that particular game. And he's definitely aggressive and violent. So yeah, and it's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. I anytime I'm playing a video game, they're like, "Oh no, we have to go to the asylum to find this." I'm like, "Oh no, this is not gonna go well. This is." Nope.
And you walk in and it's brightly lit, and there's like music going do 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 do. Hello and welcome. The Jello flavor of today is lemon, and group therapy is a 2. Welcome. Yeah, no. I wish.
It's usually preceded by me just giving one long sigh.
Yeah.
I really want that though. I want to know what kind of games are going on in the rec room, and let's play some D&D. Yeah. Let's play some D&D in that game and really make that's going to be fun. Just have some nice connection there.
Although if someone makes that game, my famous line that I use in every single one of my talks doesn't work anymore. So, there are good things. There are good things to come of the continued awfulness. So, balance.
Yep. Well, let's take a quick break to remind our viewers and listeners of the disclaimer that we've spoken about a few times here.
Many times.
Yes. And then we'll be back to talk to Dr. Dunlap about a few more questions. So be right back.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
And we're back. Dr. B, we have a few other questions for Dr. Dunlap before we get to remember, viewers, you can put question : then your question in the chat, and our awesome mod Jordan will grab it and put a little text doc at the end. But before that, Dr. B.
Dr. Me. So I got a question for you, Dr. Dunlap.
Okay.
Like without naming names.
Oh, okay.
Going back to the idea of like mental health professionals in, shows, whether it's an advice show or whatever, without naming names.
Oh no.
What do you wish shows just wouldn't do?
I wish I would read the questions before I come on the show. That's a good one for me for future self. I did.
You said you saw them.
I did. Were they read and encoded and processed? Apparently not. Okay, so not naming names. What do I? So
like
diagnostics. Yeah, like diagnostics.
Okay.
If there's someone out there saying, "Well, you obviously," I know I'm not supposed to name, but like Maury. So it's not mental health, but like those kinds of shows that are like, we bring people on and we have them discuss these interpersonal and relational conflicts because it causes drama and that gets clicks and views. And then we make definitive statements that, aren't actually backed by science, but we're positioned as authorities because we have a TV show. So I guess that's probably it. The positioning of someone as an expert, but then not holding them to the same kind of rigorous ethical standards that actual experts have to hold ourselves to, because it puts us at a huge disadvantage. If I started a Twitch channel and started doing therapy on my Twitch channel, I could probably grow a channel pretty dang pretty dang fast, and I'm sure I could bill it that way. And there's definitely a market for it, but I would never do that. Like, I refuse to do that because I'm an ethical human being.
Well, and what I'm thinking of various shows, and this is I want to be really clear. I'm not calling this out any one person, because this is no one person. The nature of television, the nature of streaming is often who can bring in the most exciting topics, who can bring in the most exciting guests.
Yeah.
And I have seen no shortage of streamers, television, mental health professionals bring in the most extreme cases in a pretty clearly exploitative way. That this is someone who's struggling a lot, and we're bringing them on because you, the audience, will find it entertaining. And they blow up because we love watching extreme examples of things. But the rest of us who are like, we can't do that because it is exploitative.
So it doesn't feel exploitative. It is exploitative.
Right.
Yeah.
And and like you said, we are at a disadvantage.
I mean, the reality of mental health is really boring.
Oh, it's so boring.
It's so mundane, and it's so unsexy, and it's so boring. Like, did you brush your teeth today? Did you go for a walk? Did you remember to take your meds? Like, it's the daily stuff. And I understand that nobody necessarily wants to check in on that. But yeah, there's Dr. Phil. I'm going to drop it. Dr. Phil's awful. He's not a real doctor. He's not real, and he's awful, and he's a terrible, terrible thing. He has tons of ethical complaints against him. But my grandmother quotes him to me like, "Oh, well, Dr. Phil says you should do this." And I'm like, Grandma, I'm an actual psychologist. Okay. I don't need you to tell me secondhand what Dr. Phil said about something that was probably staged. Okay. I had to do it. I couldn't. There's the elephant in the room.
I endorse this.
Well, I have looked at certain long-standing shows periodically over the years just to see if I remember them incorrectly, or before grad school, I had a different opinion about them versus after grad school. And it was funny, after grad school, and when I started getting into the nuance of some of the ethical codes that we all have to follow. And I saw this question in the chat, is when we refer to ethics, are we referring to personal ethics? No, we're referring to sanctioned, enforceable ethical codes that various mental health professionals have to follow. And one of the most sacrosanct codes in that is do no harm. Those codes were meant to try and curb exploitative practices towards clients. And the thing is that some of those ethics codes are so subtle that it takes an entire class or an hour to explain them to people who don't have that same training. And so when you look at shows like Dr. Phil, you look at, even I've seen some bad stuff happening on Twitch from certain streams, and I'm not going to, call them to the mat because some of them have really gotten a lot better. But it feels exploitative in a way that is really difficult to explain to people outside of our profession. It's subtle, and that's the insidious part about certain mental health professionals in media, is that the lay public can't tell the difference.
And one thing I want to piggyback on there, again, maybe related to the slide deck I have sitting on my desktop here, is that the idea of do no harm, like that's a lot of people rely on that, of like, well, we're not actively hurting anybody. Dr. Oz doesn't hurt anyone directly, and Dr. Phil doesn't hurt anyone directly. Phrasing is that's not the whole phrase.
Right.
That's just part of the phrase. The first part of that phrase is actively do right. Mm-hmm. And if you can't do that, at least do no harm. Right. So doing no harm is literally the bare minimum that we ask of people. And so if you actually want to be an actively ethical person, and in this space, at least, like, it's not enough to just not hurt someone on purpose. You have to do what's right by them. That's putting their safety first, which is why people like B and myself will never have a Twitch channel that does therapy, because even though that would probably increase our stats and numbers, and we could absolutely benefit from it professionally. Like you'd get a lot more attention, the New York Times comes calling, things like that. Like it would be good for us in that sense. It's not safe, and it's not protecting the well-being and safety of the people we'd be interacting with, and therefore it is not ethical.
And part of that ethicality has to do with considering what would be what's called subtle forms of coercion in that power dynamic. And an example, actually, Dr. Dunlap and I were talking about not too long ago. This is a common occurrence in a lot of therapeutic dynamics, especially if you work with anxiety. And I work with a lot of folks who are anxious.
Who isn't anxious?
Anxiety disorders. Well, anxiety, if y'all don't know, anxiety disorders are the most commonly diagnosed mental health challenges. And so one of the things, especially with like social anxiety, where people are symptomatically scared of being judged poorly or embarrassed, very often they feel subtly compelled into complying with rules. And that creates a really interesting therapeutic dynamic where if I give somebody like homework or extra therapeutic practice to do, I have to be really cognizant of that dynamic, because it means that whatever I suggest, they might just say, sure, when no, that's not what we want here. No. That's not what we want at all. And when we come to like media mental health professionals, the temptation of fiduciary financial recognition rewards for being on a platform that has a lot of numbers could be considered a subtle form of coercion to get them on the show. And that's where the power dynamic has to be considered. So if you've got if you've got somebody who has a Twitch channel that regularly has, 10,000 concurrent views, and they approach you and they're like, hey, you want to come on and you can be a little famous by telling your story, that could be considered a subtle form of coercion.
Yeah.
And we got to be careful about that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Just yes.
So before we, like I said, we were going to check in with chat in a little bit. However, I do think this is a good time to ask one of the nicer questions that we had for Dr. Dunlap.
Nice
soapbox.
This essentially was like, what with naming names, what are some people who are doing this right?
Oh, I really should have read these. So I know I'm totally biased, but our ambassadors, like Take This as ambassador program, the whole point is that these are people who are streamers who are also mental health advocates. And some of them are therapists, like Dr. Grizzly is an actual licensed professional. One of the people at Take This in a consultant role named Cassie Walker, they also stream and do therapy and do amazing work in that space too. Again, all of our ambassadors, even if they're not therapists, they understand the lines between what they can do as an advocate and are, put good stuff out into the world. I mean, that's who's top of mind for me. And I'm sure there's, like anxiety, she's one of our ambassadors, but she's definitely one of the biggest names out there doing this kind of work, and just being super cognizant about, staying in your lane and respecting boundaries and knowing what you know and sharing what you know and being upfront about what you don't. So it's there are people out there doing good work, but as we said earlier, it's harder if you're not sensationalizing, if you're not answering people's questions directly, if you're giving it depends, the more honest and grounded you are, sometimes the harder it is. And I wish that wasn't the case, but it is the case.
Yeah, I mean, the people following ethical codes is not TV worthy. I mean, it's boring. It's slow. It means you say it depends a lot of times, or let me give you some referrals. Let me give you some resources instead of answering your question directly. Because part of what we're supposed to do is we're not supposed to offer any direct opinions. That's where I draw a line, is offering direct opinions and advice. And that, to anybody who has not signed a consent form with me and I have not done a proper intake on. That is, and I can't do that in chat.
No. I mean, that's just to your point earlier. If you have 10,000 concurrent viewers or whatever, it does make me think like, well, then who is the client in that situation? Right. Is it your audience? Is it the person you're talking to? Like that becomes super squidgy really, really fast. And if the person you're working with doesn't, the audience doesn't like them, like, well, what does that mean for you? And talking with them more. And there's just, again, it's about putting that person's well-being first.
Right.
And yours not first. And that can be really hard.
It's incredibly hard. And I know you and I have seen that in various Twitch chats where people have brought on people who have poured their souls out for an audience, and the audience just reacted horrifically towards people.
I mean,
it was
I think
awful.
about, would I want my therapy session? So when I see my therapist, would I want that preserved in all eternity on the internet? Heck no.
No.
No. And even if I think I want that right now, I would hope that my therapist would say, no, I'm all about you, like self-determining and stuff, but looking out for your best interests. No, you don't want this on the internet, because once it's there forever. And, even though you might not care at this moment, in a year, you might really care that it's out there. And so again, it's about not that you know better than someone else, but at least in our profession, that there are risks associated with, being public about certain things and sharing certain things. And
oh God, yeah.
I
think about, it's funny. I was actually thinking about this in regards to my autism and my ADHD. I mean, so much about the stuff that you and I were trained on, and most of our colleagues, we find out when it comes to autism is either wrong. or harmful.
Yes.
Wrong at best and harmful at worst. And even being an autistic psychologist, there's so much internalized ableism I have to essentially unlearn as I work both in and with the autism community. I look back at like interviews I've done 5-6 years ago, and I'm just like, oh my God, that's what I thought then? Oh God. Yeah. And that's just out there.
No, I wanted to do podcasts for 10 years before I finally started to do it. And several times I've gone, thank God I didn't do that. Thank God I waited till then. Good.
I would say just, if you look back on your past work and it's a little bit embarrassing, that's okay, because that means that you've grown. Like I look back on papers I wrote 5 years ago, I'm like, oh God. Oh God.
Oh, man, nothing's more fun for me than going back and reading some of my old writing.
Yeah. But again, that means that you've improved and you've changed and you've grown. So just throwing out that kind of positive reframe there.
You remind me of a line from the Terry Pratchett book that I'm going to paraphrase, that you have to go through the phase of being a twerp to be the person you are.
Aww. It's so true.
Yeah.
All right, let's check in with chat and see what questions they've had while we were talking. We're gonna start with Chimp195. Question: what are your takes on mental health representation in video games? Do you have say a model for it?
Oh God.
Pandering. It's pandering.
Seriously, if he were still here and didn't dip out, I'd be like, sir, do we know you? Have we met before? Yes, no, that is not the correct answer. We have never met you at all.
He is one of our ambassadors, and he is a lovely human being. And he's currently doing his PhD research on representation of mental illness in video games and people's experience of it. And he is subtly referring to some work that I did previously around how we analyze representations in games. So instead of just looking at characters, are we looking at things like mechanics? So sanity meters and sanity effects, or, in-game menus and things like that. Are we looking at environments like the insane asylum, or the use of straitjackets, or the use of medication or procedures? And so that's what he's referring to in terms of that. And since he's not here, I'm not going to give it to him.
Ha!
Go read my paper. Well, you have. So I sent it. It's fine. Still hard for you, Chris.
Let's see. This is from Dragon Zealot. Question regarding the subject. Have any of you played the recent Spider-Man? Thoughts about Doc Ock and his transformation mentally?
I have not played the Spider-Man game, but is his transformation like it is in the movie?
No, like I do think I remember playing it, and disclaimer, I'm a massive Spider-Man fan. I love Spider-Man. Spiders are my absolute number one fear. Take that as you will. But I don't remember playing that game and ever thinking, "Ooh, that's not good." So but I also don't remember being like, oh wow, this is an amazing way they did Doc Ock. It's the better version of it. He does still start off as like a very friendly person, and then at the end of it is trying to kill people. So,
oh, is it just sort of trauma, kill everyone?
Not quite. I can't remember what the actual turn was in that game. It's weird because I'm like, I remember this part, and then I remember this part. This part over here is a little foggy.
I know the joke is usually there's a reason that supervillains are all doctors. It's the process of going through grad school that turns you evil.
Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah, no, what was that? There was that meme that went around a while ago that people who have not been to grad school looking at mad scientists going, "Oh, that person's smart," and the rest of us who have gotten doctorates are like, "No, that makes sense."
No, that makes sense. Yeah. So sorry, I can't answer that more in depth because I haven't played it. So
it is a very good game, though. I will say I loved it. But again, massive Spider-Man fan. The Lurking Writer says, question, when you use the term ethics, do you define that as something personal to each individual, or it just kind of petered off there, but it does say follow-up part of the Hippocratic Oath, or is it its own separate thing?
So we touched on the first part of that a little earlier, that ethics for psychiatrists, psychologists, for social workers, for mental health counselors are all codified, enforceable things, and each one has a different set of ethical codes, and there's a lot of overlap between them. But all of them are, yes, Dr. Dunlap, who is about to contradict me and tell me where I'm wrong.
I'm not contradicting you. I'm just going to simplify. Ethics,
that's even better.
Ethics are social constructions. Morals are individuals. Guiding light.
Good night, everybody. I've just had my mind blown.
So yes, morals are like your individual ethics, but ethics are more systemic, like social ethics or clinical ethics or medical ethics. Yeah.
Wow. That's cool.
This is why I'm keynoting on ethics later this week.
Wait, are you an expert on this? Is that why we had you on?
Oh, now everything makes sense. Okay.
I thought it was for the
Got
Pikachu. And then in terms of the Hippocratic Oath, so this is a little, actually it's a little complicated. So there's the Hippocratic Oath that doctors take when they become actual full medical doctors. That is different than what Hippocrates actually wrote. And so what Hippocrates actually wrote is the do no harm, when at all possible, do best by the patient, and at worst, do no harm. So that's where it comes from. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that, because the Hippocratic Oath, most people think about what doctors take, and it's not that. It's actually the oath that Hippocrates wrote.
Okay. Let's go to Nathaniel Lockleon?
Lock!
I'm gonna go with it. Did I say that right?
Lock.
Question, do you think there is a major difference between ethics in psychology/medicine and research ethics in other fields? My particular program doesn't even have a research ethics course, which seems very odd to me.
So what I'll put out there is my husband, who I love and adore, his degree is in political science, and his profession is politics, like working for congressmen. He used to work on Capitol Hill for several different congressmen. He works on campaigns and all of that kind of stuff. And it always blew my mind that I had to take a semester of ethics, and I'm required to take ethical courses for continuing education credits every year. And he never had to take a single course in any kind of ethics. Like, you were literally making decisions that impact millions and millions and millions of people. But the only ethics that he's ever had to take as training is about how much money is okay to take from somebody, like how much you can expense a coffee for. Like, that's the only thing he's ever had to take.
I remember those trainings.
I think it's bizarre that, you know, and even in engineering or things like that, like there's still humans involved in the process. And so I think we should absolutely treat people well. And like in research, there's always going to be power differentials between like the lead researcher and the poor postdocs who are grinding away their lives. So like, yes, there needs to be ethics in place. If for nothing else, how are you treating the subjects if you have human subjects, and or how are you treating your staff if you're in a position of power over them?
Mm-hmm. And for psychologists, all of those are very clearly defined.
Yes.
And by the way, if you're ever curious to look at all 10 sections of the American Psychological Association's ethics code for psychologists, they are freely publicly available. All you have to do is have a really boring night and go look it up.
All 84 ethical standards and the 5 guiding principles.
Which are aspirational and non-enforceable.
We took the EPPP. We passed.
Yeah. I don't remember taking it, but
no, black, you know, cut that out.
No,
gone.
There was a fun story about that. Anxiety is a thing.
It is. Can confirm. So thank you for the question.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to do one more. We weren't able to get to all questions, so your question wasn't asked here. Keep in mind that at the end of each season, we do go back through the season and grab questions from previous episodes, so we might grab yours at a later date.
Just know I will not answer them as well as Dr. Dunlap will if I answer them later. I mostly parrot what she says.
Oh, no. You have smart things you say on your own, too, sometimes.
I don't know how you managed to compliment me and condescend me all in one go.
I'm a mom. I'm really good at it. Yes, that is the best macaroni drawing I have ever seen. Yes, you are the most important human in the world to me.
All right, we're going to go with Lurking Writer. Question, what do you think of video games that openly talk about the mental health aspects of their game, or of their games, either those that do it because it's a key part of the narrative / gameplay, or because it's a form of marketing?
As a form of marketing. So are we talking about the gameplay itself or the discussion of the game?
Yeah, essentially that, like, you know, like either a game has themes of mental health in it, or what wasn't it like Psychonauts 2 that has like actually like deals with mental health things as a story plot and stuff like that. I do feel like the comparing it between like the narrative and the marketing aspect, because when it does become the marketing aspect of it, I'm a little more just like, okay, well, like Psychonauts 2, I don't feel like actually did that. Like, I don't remember seeing in their marketing, it's just like, we actually did mental health stuff. But as far as like gameplay and stuff goes, you know, I think that's good. I don't know.
So when I work with developers, one question I always have them ask is, why are we including it? So if you can't answer that question, then you shouldn't do it. And if your answer to that question is, oh, well, because we need a villain, or because we need someone to be rescued, or when it's instrumentalized, like those are not good reasons to include a vulnerable population.
Mm-hmm.
I often ask them like, well, would you include like a racial minority in that way? Oh God, no. Well, then maybe we shouldn't be doing, you know, psychological or vulnerable populations in that way either. Now, if it's essential to the story or essential to the character and it's a part of who they are, obviously, you know, Hellblade is one that we have to talk about because the main character.
It's the gold standard.
But I mean, like games like Chicory are also fantastic and wonderful and deal with very significant mental health issues, but they do it in a way that's integrated. I mean, you know, Life is Strange, Night in the Woods, Stardew Valley, they all have different levels of mental health integration into them. And that's just, I think whatever you want to, as long as you're not perpetuating harmful stereotypes, I think it's fine for it to be there. Whether it's something as simple as, I know like in Life is Strange True Colors, there's like a card for a group therapy. That's so simple, but it also is super normalizing of, hey, some people go to therapy, all the way up to things like Hellblade that are like, oh, wow, this is a game about how mental illness changes our perception of the world and how we interact with it. So any of those count. Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's a central feature of the character. And like, I think about Hellblade, and the entire game was through the lens of their experiences, and you cannot separate their experiences from the experiences they were having. They were a necessary story plot. They weren't just like, oh, psychosis, that's why. And they integrated it in a truly, to use your model, a 3-dimensional manner.
Didn't talk about the model, so that's not going to make any sense.
Go read her paper.
Or just ask me. Again, that paper, the very first time I did it was probably about 5 years ago. It was 2018. So it's probably when I'm like, oof, Kelli, really. Yes. But then there's the marketing perspective of like, ooh, this game's about mental health. I don't think I've ever really played a game that has been marketed that way that has been good. I know good subjective, but like, at that point, it's almost like edutainment games. Yeah. Like, let's play Endeavor RX to help treat your ADHD. Well, I have a lot to say about that, but we don't have the time and it's not on topic. Well,
that actually may be an episode for later in this season, and I'm trying to get a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Dunlap, to come on board and talk about it.
About digital therapeutics?
Yeah.
Ooh, I'll be in the chat being a pain in the side.
All right. Well, I think that is a good place to start wrapping up. Where, if people wanted to find you and your work for the two of you on the interwebs, where could they do so?
Well, you can find me on the Twitters at Kelli N Dunlap, Kelli, the letter N, and then my last name Dunlap, Dunlap. I live on Twitter. I'm very responsive on Twitter. So that's probably the best way to get at me. I do have a website that has my papers. So if you're interested in that, it also has recordings of some of my presentations and panels. It even has my syllabi from some of the courses I teach. So if that's at all of interest, it is dunlappsyd.com. So my last name, Dunlap, and then my credentials, psyd.com. And so all of my stuff is there as well.
And I'm around. You can, first of all, follow Take This Org. Okay, follow Take This Org. That is the most important thing for you to follow in terms of this stuff, because Dr. Dunlap's work is sometimes on there. Sometimes we do some stuff together, like the burnout module that we just released. Dr. Dunlap is a wizard with graphics design and took some very boring words I wrote and made them amazing. And
I made them pretty. Not amazing.
So pretty.
They are prettier.
If you want to follow me, I'm the Dr. B. That's TheeDoctorB as in boy. I'm on most of the socials under that name. But yeah, feel free to follow.
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter at the Treavor. There's an A hiding in there, and you can follow me for reasons. I
like that. I'm going to take that.
Let's see. Thank you so much to Jordan for moderating in the chat and doing a fantastic job today. And thank you to Codename Entertainment and Take This for letting us have having a place to have these conversations.
Yay!
Let's see. I think we have a pretty normal schedule for the rest of the week. You can find that on our Twitter, our Reddit, and our Discord. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Dunlap, for sitting down and talking with us today. This is an absolute blast. And there's no better person that we know to talk about this stuff. So thank you.
Oh, I'm delighted. When B asked, he's like, "Oh, what about Tuesday?" Or Tuesday. I'm like, "Well, I'm leaving for Germany." He said words that I'm sure no one would ever think that Dr. B even knows. But then I reassured him that it'll be okay. It'll be okay. I can make it work.
I swear so much behind the scenes. I swear so much.
I was going to try and keep the veneer. But yes, thank you so much for having me anytime. It is an absolute delight. This community is fantastic. And thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, that was going to do it for this week's episode. So until next week, take care of yourself.
Bye, everyone.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.